How sincere do you think the Liberal government, Mark Carney, and then what power do they really have when they have to, you know, concede to Ontario and Quebec as the two most populous provinces for votes? How likely is it that Alberta could see a better deal within Confederation?
Well, that's part of which I'm kind of concerned about is whether that could be achieved. Now, certainly, I know my friend Ted Morton would argue that there are some very significant interests for both Quebec and Alberta to get together and to push for more decentralization in the country, because both would welcome it, and there's a lot of joint interest, I think, in doing that. But you are right; it's not something that's going to be easy to accomplish, and I think again it has to be looked upon by Albertans about whether, in the end, separation is going to be desired, or just try to achieve as much autonomy as possible within the confederation that we currently have. There are some things that Alberta could do. I mean, I'll give you a good example. Alberta collects its own corporate income tax, but it follows the federal tax base almost by religion. And yet it could have used the corporate tax for its policy reasons to encourage more investment in the country, including changing not just the tax rate, but changing the base. But it hasn't, here it has that ability to do that. Nothing's stopping Alberta from changing the corporate tax base to what it wants, but it hasn't done that. And so it hasn't even, it's a small example, but it hasn't even used the tools that it could use to develop its own province. And so I think that's an example. If Alberta, for example, and I've argued this point before, if Alberta pulled out of the personal income tax, there is a negative. The negative is that people are going to have to file to the federal government separately, and file a separate form to the Alberta government. And of course, that happens in the United States, by the way, all the time, because there's no joint agreements between the federal government and the state governments to collect taxes in the United States. So you have to. I remember I spent time in New York, and I did some teaching at NYU. I had to file three tax forms, income tax forms, one to the federal government, one to the New York State, and one to the New York City. It was a real pain in the neck. But anyway, that's besides the point. But if you kind of be willing to give up that one aspect of the thing, we could run our own personal tax system. And we could make it a lot more, let's say, pro-growth, the Alberta personal tax, by changing the base a lot more than just simply having, just playing around with the rates and having some tax credits. And so, in fact, I've argued that if people don't even know this, but the top tax rate, federal tax rate in Quebec is 28%. It's not 33%. Now you might ask, why is that? Well, because Quebec, first of all, got extra, instead of taking cash, they got more tax points. So I think the federal government should give more tax points to the provinces. I know Quebec would be in favor of that, and maybe some of the other provinces, income tax points. And then we could actually make if we have a flatter provincial sales tax, we could get that top rate down. Instead of being 48%, we can get it down to 45, 44, 43%, which would be consistent with the United States, which we have to compete a lot for entrepreneurs and other people like that. So that's an example of a change that we could try to push for. Not only collecting our own personal income tax and adjusting the base to the way we would like to have it, but also if we could push for more tax points, then we could actually even make a flatter tax structure for Alberta in our favor. Main point is that there are things that we could try and do to try to improve ourselves. Obviously, we'll get more autonomy as a province if you separate from Canada. You're going to be able to do whatever you want to do at that point. And I think there are some arguments maybe for doing that. But again, people have to make a judgment about whether they want that kind of autonomy or that much of autonomy versus staying part of Confederation, getting less autonomy, but still achieving things that the Alberta doesn't currently do.
Well, let's take a look at taxation, for example, because again, I look at taxation as destructive on labor in particular. I think there are better ways to tax. I think consumption taxes are fine. You know, people pay for what they user fees, for example. But I think to tax an individual's labor, that's putting a tax on being productive. That's a success tax, in my opinion. And I think there's far greater ways for Alberta as an independent nation, Canada, anywhere, to take a look at taxation. I think taxation is this convenience to government, and it's a lazy choice because it produces predictable revenue, but it comes at a cost. And I think for a lot of people today, and I want to get into some of the structural issues around democracy, which I think you'll have some amazing input on, but let's tackle the taxation for a second, because I think Alberta, with the amount of natural wealth and resources that we have, I mean, you have countries around the world like Saudi Arabia that they don't provide any taxation on labor, and people flood there and would love to work, and be productive, where there's an encouragement to reinvest in your company. There's the encouragement to be truly successful, to take some more risk, and to innovate and be creative. So from a taxation perspective, do we need, honestly, I mean, taxation initially came in as a temporary War Measures Act. I mean, I have the original Tax Act. It was 50 some pages. And
The income, by the way.
the Income Tax Act, right? And now it's 4,000 plus pages. It's so complicated that CRA can't even keep track of the rules and the regulations anymore. So, I mean, this is part of the problem, I think, with big government and with taxing labor. It just creates this government bloat and more bureaucracy and more regulation. And it just becomes easy for government to do that.